that, yeah. So I want to start the discussion by just focusing again, as we talk about impact assessment in community development, then of course I want to start with from the point of the definition. And largely as we talk about community development, we are focusing on change. And this is a process of change which is built around initiatives that are started by the communities themselves, and all initiatives done or being done or undertaken by communities together with the partners, stakeholders who are also based in the community, have an interest in the community. Bottom line of which is to improve the well-being of members of the community, and including also improving the place in which they live. And this more so when you talk about communities that are based in places where we also talk about not just building the community organically, but also improving the infrastructure that is supportive of community life. And so as we talk about community development, of course, we want to focus on two components, where again, as we talk about the change process, could be, we are talking about the change that organically takes place with the community, where in the course of time, the processes that take place within community and the interaction that take place within the community, change takes place. There are alterations, there are improvements, there are changes that, or improvements that will improve the life of communities, originating from within the community. But equally, there's also change that is interventionist, and that's change that is brought in from outside or designed to change the way things are organized or work within the community. And to a large extent, this is where we have interest in terms of when you're assessing the impact of this change, which now we insert or we bring on board within communities, because largely that's what, as practitioners, we seek to do, to manage or to organize change in communities. And as we, again, seek to undertake the process of change, of course, we also need to anchor it within the definition of, as given by IACD, where community development largely is a goal-based process. Largely within communities, we are trying to enhance participative democracy, largely giving voice and agency to members of the community so that they can be able to be articulate on things that are important to them, issues that are important to them, and also represent themselves as beings who are conscious and are conscious of their stake within the development framework. Equally, we also seek to bring the interventions and usher in development that is sustainable, so that again we can also seek to continually ensure there is a balance between the social dimensions within the communities, the economic infrastructure that is that again is developed within the community, so that we can build capabilities to ensure livelihoods, including incomes, and also to manage the environmental imperatives, where again we are seeing the environment as an important source of livelihood and the anchor of all the development activities that we undertake, given that again out of the environment we get all the resources. And in some cases there is also the social environment, which is also equally important, and all these need to be managed in a way as you do under development, so that we can be able to assure the development of and the improvement of the lives of the present generations, but equally of generations that are going to come, and ensure we also don't deplete or impair the balance of resources that are available. The issue of rights is also important. When we are trying to, again, to bring about interventions, we also need to ensure that people's rights are guaranteed, largely to ensure that the dignity of human beings that is God-given is not interfered with or endangered in any way, creating economic opportunity for all, so that then we can improve livelihoods. Then the issue of equality important, where again we also need to give attention to the needs of all in society and in our communities, where again we want to do development that is inclusive. And then lastly, of course, ensure social justice, fairness, and for all in terms of wealth creation, in terms of opportunities, and even benefiting from the privileges that exist in our society. And so when you talk about then impact assessment, ultimately these are important parameters that we need to focus on. So that is just not a question of, for instance, addressing a specific need? Is it education? Is it health? Is it gender equity? All this, or gender-based violence being addressed? Or is it a question of just improving on livelihoods? All addressing the needs of the marginalized or those at risk, including, for instance, now we are dealing with a bit of refugees because of what is happening in Europe and in the eastern part of Europe, and displacement in some of the other continents because of either conflict or environmental challenges. How do we all manage all this so that ultimately we can have a fair and a just society? The process of community development will entail three components. The organization, realizing that we are all individuals, but we need to be organized to work as one, or to work collectively to address the needs of our communities. The needs that originate from individuals, need that organize from us together, organize as one in a community setting. Then community development also is a process of education, the awareness creation, leading through the whole process of reflection and action, so that ultimately we can enhance our command of knowledge. And then empowerment is where we're talking about releasing the energies that are within us, or building the capabilities that are within us as individuals and as communities, so that we can have better lives. The vehicles that we use to bring about and to ensure community development takes place, then of course would be packaged in programs, would also be packaged in projects. Programs are the wider dimensions of intervention. Projects are the small components that are time-bound to achieve very specific ends. And as practitioners, there are cases we are involved programs, there are cases we are dealing with projects. Ultimately, this is the global definition, which I believe you are familiar with. But then the key question is, as practitioners, how do we get to know that we have achieved that we set out to achieve with our programs, with our projects? Which we achieve, the goal being to transform communities for better lives, because we want, as we interact with communities, to move from the one point to the next point where lives is going to be much better. Life defined in all broadest dimension possible. And not just better, but better for the long haul, and also in a sustainable manner. And that's where the issue of impact comes in, because it's not a one-off or a very short-term intervention. When you talk about impact, you're talking about something that's long-term and long-lasting. And that's a question of then asking ourselves, how do we, as we interact with communities, as we work through interventions or innovations within communities, how do we get to answer that key question? Of course, there's a routine monitoring as we do our projects and our programs. And the routine monitoring, largely, we are more focused in terms of, are we on cost? Because again, we have a budget to expend to get some very specific outcomes. So are we on cost, or we are going to have more overruns? And then the issue of timeliness. Are we promising projects and then it takes forever, yet people are still in need? And largely with routine monitoring, we want to ensure ourselves that on a day-to-day basis, all is well. But then there is the aspect of evaluation, which more could be done in the middle of the project or towards the end of the project. And again, we are more focused on the results. Are we attaining the results which we set out to achieve based on the set goals, which we gave ourselves as we started our programs, And most of evaluation is going to be done immediately after the project is complete, the terminal or end term evaluation, so that we can say we have completed this project, we have achieved the results, good. But then after the results, that's not all that we're interested in. We talked about the long term, and this is where impact assessment comes in, where ultimately we are seeking to transform communities for the long haul. We are seeking to get results, but getting results is not good enough, because then we want to assure that after all the results, the activities are completed and everything, then we are attaining the best outcomes, and these outcomes are transforming people's lives. People's lives are changing for the better. And that means then we need to focus on the effects of the interventions over time, the results of what we achieve over time. And so impact assessment is moving beyond just the closure of the project. what happens after a project is completed, what happens after a program is completed. And that's what is of interest, so that then we can then look at development in the long haul. And that means then we need to have mechanisms and systems in place to be able then to adjudge that what we are doing is having the desirable impact, based again on the parameters that we indicated earlier on, as shown by as given by the definition of IACD, as adopted in 2016. And so likely, as we talk about impact assessment again, impact assessment I would want to frame it within the theory of change, where again the issue of cause and effect becomes important, because again we want to look at whether the interventions we put in place, as we work with communities, will cause and then result into effects that are desirable and that are part of what the community is also interested in. And therefore we are working and bring about change that is desirable. Because it's also possible to start interventions, and then of course, if they misbehave, then we end up with change that is not in the direction that is serving the interests of the community. And so we need to be able ultimately to establish that we are getting desirable outcomes in the long term, and the change is taking place as desired. In the whole process of managing this change process, we also need to be able to see how we can control for the unforeseens, and the way for controlling for the unforeseens, and then is to have contingency measures in place. And that again, in our impact assessment, then we need to see then what measures are actually put in place, so that then, like in the budgeting process, there is always the contingency aspect of the budget, which then will take care of all this. In terms of, again, the awareness generation and capacity building of communities, there's also the part of education, in terms of the education bit, where communities will be told, okay, this is what we are doing, but these are some of the assumptions that are in place. And that's part of taking care of the contingencies, as we give also the other possible scenarios that might come through. Equally, the theory of change is also built on the idea of intervention or innovation systems, where again we are talking about transforming communities and community context, where again we want to be alive to the fact that different members of communities and different actors within the communities have their contribution to make, and a partnership of sorts comes in place, where the interests of the communities and the interests of those partnering with the communities, be they the state or non-state actors, then they become co-designers and also co-producers of desired outcomes. And so we talk about then a multi-pronged or a multifaceted process of managing change. And so even as we then want to superintend our interventions, our innovations, then we also need to take into account there are also other actors in place who are also doing their bit, and ultimately with the same community to produce desirable outcomes. And this then introduces other dynamics in the process, which you also need to be alive to. And then the question, of course, is that as we talk about then impact assessment, then there is always a question of how to attribute the impact of our interventions and what we are seeing as the results to what basically we are doing as community development practitioners. Of course, the attribution, we can track what we have done up to the end. But then to say that there is change, that the communities are much better, equally, I want to bring into attention the fact that we also need to have some baseline of sorts, baseline information that we can say, when we started, this is where this community was. After we put in our intervention, after we have put in all these innovations, this is what we have achieved. And so you can be able to track the cause and effect, and also over time, so that we can say, we have moved the community from this status to the next. Nutrition levels have improved from this point to the next. Employment levels, as the Jute was indicating, has moved from this level to this level. In this country, in our country, we are talking about close to 60% unemployment rate for the youth, which is quite a challenge. And so the issue of benchmarks then become important over time. And so creating timelines then become important, so that then we can be able to say, this is the impact and this is what is changing over time. I hope it makes sense to all of us what I'm saying. Well, I might want to ask ourselves why it is important to do community development impact assessment. And I just want to cite three reasons. Of course, there are many more, but one of the things we want to be able to be alive to the impacts that we are creating so that we can be able to improve on our interventions, improve on the processes so that we can get the best results possible under the circumstances, improving what we do. But that then is going to be based on the knowledge that we continually get by assessing what we are doing, what has been done, and what changes are happening in the community, or what then the improvements we can see consequently. The other important reason for doing impact assessment is, again, we want to be able to inform our decision making with our projects, with our programs. And based on the information that comes through, we want to, even at any point in time, be able to determine whether it is making sense, we continue, whether it is not making sense based on the information, is it coming through, see how to discontinue at whatever point in time. And the issues of replication also important, so that you can see whether you can do the same in other settings, in other communities, or we can scale up what we are doing if it is having huge impact in the lives of communities. And then, of course, the whole issue of accountability. After all the effort, we want still to be able to account to everybody so that we can say, after what you have done, this is what there is to show in terms of the transformation that is taking place in the lives of communities. Or in terms of accounting, we have asked communities to partner with us as practitioners. We want to be able to demonstrate even to them as the primary stakeholders that what they are doing and what is being done in their context makes all the difference that is making the lives of everybody else better. And so it's evidence generation, so to speak. As I moved to steps in undertaking impact assessment, and I just quickly run through, because again, much of the steps is what basically we do in our research work or in our evaluations. And largely we have the program, the project that we're assessing, which we need to understand. Then we need to design the assessment in terms of setting goals, determining who is going to participate, the methodologies, the tools to be used, the time frame that is in place, and of course mobilizing the resources to support the process, and then of course assembling the team that is going to help with the process, so that then again, increasingly we want again to be accountable and have a participatory process so that you can listen to all the voices, including the voices of the community, where we will be talking about participatory as a community development impact assessment. Then of course, then we carry out the assessment in the community, do the analysis, and develop the report. The whole idea of the report is to demonstrate that change has taken place from the baseline to the current status. And that is the thrust that we want to be able to demonstrate. And so all through, it's important to look for the evidence and to build on that evidence so that then we can be able to say there is impact that is positive, that is resulting from the interventions that have been put in place. Of course, it's always important to validate the results, go back to the stakeholders and confirm that what is being coming through and being reported as outcomes in terms of results is what basically is, and the community is in agreement with the same, and in the event of any variation or any changes, then that can be done before then dissemination of the results can be done in all the different fora, including publication. And nowadays we have social media, which is very fast. A few challenges, of course, come through as we do our impact assessment, and I'll just focus on three in passing. The cause and effect is, as we talk about the theory of change, might appear to be very linear, but in the reality of time and communities, this is not always the case, because within communities context, the contexts are complex. Their community realities are integrated. And so most of the time, it is at times not so clear what is causing and what is the effect that is coming through. And so that always becomes a challenge in terms of then teasing out what is causing what at any point in time. And so that becomes important in terms of then realizing that we are making an assessment within a context which is very dynamic, which is very complex and multifaceted. Aspects are already interacting. And so you may not get the linearity so easily as we want, as easily would want to, because of the complex nature of our community context. Then communities settings are also theaters for many actions and actors. I talked about partnerships, where you go to the community and then you find there are so many actors, there are so many projects that are already being implemented, and all of them are having different impacts. And so we have a dynamic theater, so to speak, and that has implications in terms of then determining, in terms of determining then whose effect is as a result of what action. And so your actions might appear to be effective, but then they have been supported or influenced or interfered with by the actions of others. And so to that extent, then we need always to be cautious as we talk about the impact that we are attaining, because we also need to take into account the dynamism that is in the theater, that is the community setting. Then lastly, the point I want to bring about is that community development is not an event. At the end of an event, it's very easy to pull down the tents, to pull down everything, close the budget and say, okay, look, let's assess where we are, what has happened. But when you talk about community, it's a process. There are things that are happening day by day, and interventions that were started a long time ago might now be manifesting their results at the time when you're also trying to assess your results. The information given many years ago might be the time now the community is started to try out some of these innovations, for instance, in agriculture. And that's the time now you're also trying to do your measurement. And so it becomes very difficult then to know exactly at what point you freeze and then be able to demonstrate what you have achieved. Yet we are talking about community life that is dynamic, community development interventions that are resulting in continuous change, so to speak. And that becomes a challenge in terms of assessing then and determining exactly where we are with our impact assessment and the results therefrom. And so caution then becomes important. And so I want to bring this to our close by, again, getting us back to our discussion in our point of reflection. Because again, we are involved in programs, we are involved in projects currently, all we've been in the past. And what you might want to reflect is what our experiences have been is we tried to bring about the impact or to see whether there is any impact in what we have been doing or working with in our communities. And that's a point of reflection. But of course, I'll come back again with the same. So, marketing time. We have this book, International Community Development Practice, that is available, published by Rollege out of the International Standards for Community Development Practice, which again is an important reference point. If we are going to assess the impact of what we are doing, then it's also important that we also align ourselves with the standards of community development practice so that we can look at the change that we are trying to bring about. How does it align with the minimums that have been provided for in the National Community Development Standards document? And of course, recently there's some podcasts have been done and being released on each chapter, and they're available. Then lastly, I want to invite you to the World Community Development Conference that's going to be in October, hosted from Georgia by Inclusive Practices, our member organization. Registration is going and submission of abstracts is ongoing. So that's the much I want to share for the commercial break, and of course sharing of information so that again we can continue the engagement. So back to the point of reflection. What has been your experience in determining the impacts of your project in communities, what issues have arisen, and how have you addressed them. And so I want to open the discussion to all of us. And thank you very much, Asanteni. God bless you. So back to all of us. And the floor is open.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Daniel.
Thank you, Reverend. Any comment?
Yeah, here in Zimbabwe, our church is running a program called Community-Based Aid Program. But the program is aimed at helping orphans, widows, the old, and the underprivileged people. And the church has managed to raise resources whereby these people are grouped according to their wards, to their places where they live. Then they are given chicks with the food for the chicks, so that when the chicks are ripe, they can sell. And even the market is searched for them by the church. But we had problems to say, people just overlooked and said, because this project is for the church, so it is for the church people. So a specific church, that was a problem, and the communities raised that. But how we solved it is that we said it was just an oversight, because when we invited people, we're not actually inviting people from our own church. So now the project is extended to people of different churches and also of other religions. But now, what is happening is, now you know the politics of Africa. When you want to help people, and the politicians seem to like to see those people continue to suffer. So it doesn't go well with the politicians that the church is doing this. So they try to follow up and verify and talk to the people. When you have finished your meeting, then they call them again. They say, what were you discussing about? So they end up, the politicians end up like searching for our community development individuals whom we send to the community. So at times, people, these workers would say, no, I'm feeling unsafe. Let me quit the project and the duty which you have given me. And even as a nation, they are crafting a bill which is against these PVOs. Which different churches have established, because they say you are funded by the West, so that you want to destabilize the stability of the nation. So it doesn't go well with us, because our purpose is just to help people. Then we look for partners who give us money. Then we are genuine in how to promote community development. Then all this comes up. Then it's like you are poured water into your face. Then they say you have to cool down, chill. Why is that? You want to help them? Chill. We are going to look for money. Even if we get it after 10 years or 20 years, then we will help them. So you see, that is the problem which we face. So the political thing, we are yet to address it, because we don't see the process which we can follow to address it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend, for that intervention. And of course, it brings on board the issues I was indicating about the complexities of our community context. Issues of ownership now arise immediately. Now results are coming out, and the change is being realized. People start now wanting to own the change. In some cases, be the owners of the interventions being disowned. The aspects of, again, locus of control, who is going to control the dynamics in the community, including the power play, and of course then the issues of the political interference and political expedience, which are dynamics that as practitioners, again, we would need to be alive to. And this is a reality of many countries. Thank you very much, Reverend. The floor is open.
I'd like to speak after the Reverend, because Daniel, you explained to us what heaven would look like. It is the ideal world, and my serious concern was, and I'd like to hear the floor on this. You mentioned right from the beginning, change is important, and it's a goal-based process. You mentioned social justice for all. You mentioned a better life when you brought it into environment of sustainability, sustainable, better life for future. Yes, it is all about change, but my question still remains. I've got two serious questions for all of us to think about. Whose change is it? It seems to be we are working back from an ideal world. You know, that ideal world, what I'm trying to get at, from our arguments, it seems to be there are communities that don't need development. And where I come from, it's impossible. My point of departure is all communities need development. The content is just different. But it seems to be we've got this ideal capitalist environment where people live in an environment where there's money, there's jobs, there are services, they have formal houses, and so forth and so forth. I think it is a pipe dream. I'm not comfortable with that. I think it must always be the community participants or the population in that target community's needs. And the last point that I just want to bring in, it's a catch-22. When a person, Reverend, in your case, when a person becomes developed, so-called, got a job, decent job, I'm selling the chickens and whatever it is, the first thing they do is they move out of the community. And then that community is one empowered individual less. And how do we break that chain? I don't have the answers. I'm just saying that what we see is when we have so-called economically underdeveloped communities, and that's just one side of it, when they become economically empowered, they knock off, they're out of it. I can't live here anymore, that type of thing. So yes, it's a very, like you rightly say, it's a very complex issue. And I think we are in a world which is the open debate. But my last question is, whose development are we talking about? Is it the donor, Reverend Manumati? Is it the donor who said, I think we should do this? Is it the church that thinks, I think we should do this? Or is it really Joe Soap, the person that sits there in the morning in his house? Are we raising the quality of life of that individual or not? I think one of the concepts could be critical mass, and I'm going to prepare a presentation for the conference on that, the critical mass and the critical minimum, but that's a future music. I'd like to hear what the people say. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Deshut, for that intervention. And of course, the question is still, whose community development, whose change? And earlier on, I talked about the organic change that will take place in communities. If we never intervened, the communities would still realize change and their own change. But the question is given all the knowledge that we have and all the resources that the communities might not be enriched of, then do we still want to allow them to live in isolation? Yet there is so much that is happening, and that gives space for community practitioners to intervene. And then, of course, there is a minimum of, as they intervene, what are the safeguards? So that then still they are guided by what the communities initially wanted to achieve, not what the interventionists want to achieve. And that's the point at which, again, I painted the heaven, which has been part of the point of convergence in terms, as we talk about the international standards for community development practice, which gives us the ideal, or in terms of community development to look like, even as we design our interventions. And so that's the point we might want to look at. And of course, the question again is, as you put it, do we empower individuals in communities, or do we need to find ways of empowering communities collectively? And that again has issues in terms of then who is the unit of analysis as we intervene and as we work with communities. Is the unit of analysis the individual, the household, or the community as a collective? And that again becomes a bone of contention. I feel most of the time we might want to be capacity build individuals to become pillars of support in communities. But you have seen cases, as you indicate, when they become better off, then they get out of the community, and then the community starts bleeding the resources that have been developed, which would have been pillars of their own development. We had a case of a water project in one of the southern counties of this country, and when they did boreholes, they trained young men to maintain the water pumps. But then the young men had skills which now enabled them to cross over and go to town and look for employment. And so when the water points needed the servicing, there was nobody to service them. Until now, the organization that was behind the project trained the women who are more permanent, and they are the managers of the water resource. And that problem of then maintaining the water points was addressed, because then, and that's the point that looking at who are the people who need the skills, and the once given the skills and the empowerment, then they can use the same on a continuous basis for the benefit of the community. Of course, we are not saying that if the women get the skills, they should also not go, but we need to have some kind of balance of some sort to ensure sustainability and continuity of our interventions for the greater good of the community. But they should post the question to all of us. Any reaction, any comment? What have been our experiences?
Okay, maybe I can add something, Dr.
Okay,
yeah, the domain of collectivity is key in community work. However, we should approach it from the individual level, where we empower individuals at their households, which of course now translates to the entire society. And who should benefit, or who should carry the reward in terms of the development? Let me say that a big percentage should go to the community, but again, we can't assume the aspects of the people who support the community, because when we leave the communities to do their own way, of course, following the philosophies of community development, you find themselves doing same things for many years. So therefore, foreigners, external agencies coming on board is very, very important. So therefore, the development should focus on the community, and at the same time, the credit should also go to people who are coming to bring this change to this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Boniface. Again, the oscillation between the individual and the community. Any further intervention? We still have a few more minutes.
Daktari, you have given a good example of a project. So therefore, that one teaches us to also reinforce the aspect of community structures, because once you empower a few individuals, then some project will fail. Therefore, some project requires community structures. Like in Kenya, we had cattle dips sometimes back, which were managed by communities. So if you left that project to an individual, trust me, it can fail. So therefore, it also depends with which type of project based on the context. Therefore, the aspect of either individual ownership or community ownership comes into play. It depends.
Thank you, Boniface. Any further intervention? We have 1 more minute. Okay, based on the silence therein, then it looks like we are good to go. And possibly just to indicate, the series of webinars continue, and we have in June a presentation on community-based adaptation to climate change, and Boniface, who has been speaking, will be our speaker then. And so you're welcome to pay attention to that. Then in July, we'll be going to community social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility and community development. And then we'll share more details as we go along. Again, I'm inviting ourselves to make presentations as we go along. December, we'll have, again, an open forum just to reflect and also look ahead. And so thank you so much for finding time and for being part of this engagement. We are so glad that out of the support, we are now on the 17th edition, and we have already run 1 edition of the masterclass, courtesy of the shoot, inviting more people to the discourse of community development in our region and beyond. So thank you very much, and see you in the next webinar in June. Have a good day, good evening, those who are in the evening, and good night, those who are going into the night. Thank you so much. And the recording will be again available on the website once it's processed. Again, courtesy of Meredith at IACD head office. And thank you very much, Meredith, for the support always. So bye for now from Nairobi.